Okay, so now we want to add authentication, and we already have some users in the database. We seeded the database with these users. They all have the password of 1 through 6. So we want to work on the backend auth route or the login route. So let's create in our routes right here. We'll create a file, in routes, create a file called user routes.js. And we also want to create in controllers a user controller.js. And I'm just going to copy from product controller the async. I'll just copy this whole thing right here, this first function and what we brought in. And instead of product, we want to bring in the user model. And this first route that we're going to create is going to be to authenticate the user. So we want to validate an email and password, and then we want to send back some data. Now ultimately we want to send back a token that we can save on the client so that we can use that token to access protected routes later. But in this video I just want to do the email and password authentication part, and then in the next one we'll start to get into tokens. So this is going to auth the user and ultimately get a token, and this will be a post request to API/users/login, and this is going to be public. Let's change the name of this to auth user, and let's see, let's just get rid of all this for now. So the first thing I'm going to do is get data from the body. Now, what I mean by that is when we set a form in the front end and we submit it, we're going to send a request and we're going to send data in the body. Now we can also mimic that through Postman. So what I'm going to do in Postman right now is create a new folder in ProShop. So I want to add a folder, and this is going to be for users and auth. So routes that have to do with user, I'll say, I don't know, managing users and authentication. So let's create that. And the route that I want to create, or the request I want to add here, is going to be post API users and login. Authenticate user and get token. So what we'll do is we'll make a post request to our URL. Remember, we have that URL variable /API users login, and obviously we need to send an email and password. So with Postman we can go to body, and we can choose. You can send form encoded data or form URL encoded or raw JSON. So over here I'll choose JSON. And for authentication we need to send an email. I'm going to put something that isn't in the database. So I'll do test@example.com. That's not an actual email that is in our database. And then password I'll do 1 through 5. So if I send this, I mean right now it's not going to do anything because we didn't hook this route up, but this is going to be the body data, and the way that we access that in here is with request.body. That will give us the data that's sent in the body. However, we do have to just add one piece of middleware in our server.js file in order for that request.body to actually parse. So we need to add the body parser. So we'll go, let's go just up at the top here, like right after app, and say app.use. And we can just say express.json, and that will allow us to accept JSON data in the body. So now this request body will be able to access like request.body email, request.body password. And what I'll do is destructure that data from request body. So I want to pull out the email and password. In fact, what I'm going to do here is just a let's do res.json, Actually, we'll just res.send, and we'll send email password. And let's hook this route up. So we're going to have to export auth user, and then in our user routes, which is empty right now, I'm going to just copy what we have in product routes, because we need to bring in our router, and then we're going to import auth user from the user controller. And then let's say route.route slash, actually we're only going to have a post request to users login, so instead of that we'll just do router.post to, so we're just going to do slash login, because this is going to be hooked to slash use API slash users. So route post login, and then we'll call auth user, and we'll get rid of this. Now we have to bring this user routes into the server.js just like we did with product routes. So let's go there and call this user routes and change this to user routes. And then down here we want to mount it to API slash users like that. And now if I go ahead and I send this again, invalid status code 12345. Oh, wait a minute. So I did res.send. Let's actually do this. Res.send email password. So the response here you can see is what I sent, tested example in 12345. So we now have access to the email and password that's being sent. Obviously I don't want to do this, I just wanted to show you guys that I can access that data from request.body. So now we want to find a user, so let's say const user, and we're going to await and take our user model and use find one. We want to find one document, and we want to find it by email. So basically we're doing this. We're saying we want to find email that matches this email. And since these are the same, we can just go like that. So that'll find the user. Now we want to check if the user exists. Also though, we need to match the password. So this will find the email. We need to make sure that the password that's sent matches that user's password. And remember, what we're sending is a plain text password, but the password that's in the database is encrypted. So we need to use bcrypt. Now we could do that here, but what I would rather do is put a method in the model. So if we go to our user model, we can actually create methods here that we can access with an instantiated user. So let's see. So what I want to do is go right under the schema, and we're going to take the user schema and say dot methods dot, and let's call this match password. And this is going to be an async function, and it's going to take in the entered password, which is going to be a plain text password. And then we need to use bcrypt to compare the entered password, the plain text, to the one in the database that's hashed. So we need to bring in bcrypt. So import bcrypt from bcrypt.js. And here there's a method called compare that will compare the plain text to the encrypted password. So I want to return from this, and we want to use await because this returns a promise. Bcrypt dot compare, and we want to pass in the entered password, and we want to compare it to this dot password, because we actually call this match password on that specific user, and we can access their password with this dot password, or any of their fields. We could use this .name and get that user's name. All right, so we want to just create this method and save this file. And then back in our user controller, where I'm checking to see if the user exists, I want to say and then put some parentheses here. I'm going to await, because this returns a promise, user dot match password, and we pass in the password that we get from the body, which is the plain text. So that's going to go ahead and try to match the plain text to the encrypted password using bcrypt inside of our model. That way we don't have to bring bcrypt into the controller and do it all here. So I think it's just a little cleaner. Now, as far as what we want to return, I'm going to say res.json, and I'm going to return the _ID, which will be user._ID, and also the name, user.name, and then email, user.email, and is admin. And then also we're going to return a token, but we haven't added that functionality yet, so that I'm just going to set that to null. Now, if the user is not found and the user password doesn't match, so let's do an else here, then we're going to do a res.status, set it to 401, which is unauthorized, and let's throw a new error, and we'll say invalid email or password. So let's save that, and now I'm going to go back to Postman. I'm going to keep this in here and send, and we get invalid email or password. Now, even if I get the email correct, so what is one of the emails? John. The password though is 1 through 6. If I send this, and we get illegal arguments, numbers. Oh, I'm sending this as a number. Password is not a number, it's a string. So actually we need double quotes. Let's try that. And again, we get invalid email or password. If we have the correct password and we have an email that doesn't exist, we get invalid email or password. And if it does match, we get a 200 response. We get the ID, name, email, is admin, and token, which right now is null. We're going to fix that in a little bit and get the actual token, but the authentication itself is working. We're able to authenticate with an email and a password. So I'm going to go ahead and save this route here so we can use this whenever we want to log in. And if I use, if I log in as admin, that should be valid as well. Good. So now that we're able to at least authenticate and get some of this user data, the next step is to generate a token that we can send so that we can access some private routes. And we're going to have to create our own authentication middleware to create private routes. So we're going to move on to that next.